In this talk, I wanted to, again, maybe to remind what everyone knows, that there are serious issues with law as such, and the constitutionalism is precisely a way to address and maybe even partly overcome these problems. One of the issues with today's Russia is that the government is extremely legalistic. This is a rule by lawyers through the letter of law, which Russian authorities tend to hold on to. I mean, they rarely do something like completely illegal. Sometimes they do murders of people in other countries, but for the most part, they do everything through the courts of law. So there is nothing necessarily good in law, but the clicker. I start with a dialectical analysis of the internal contradictions of law as such. And I have to go quick, unfortunately. It's a long presentation, so ask me if you don't catch something. So there is an obvious tension between the letter and the spirit of law. The law does operate by technicalities, by very precise formulations, but then you can use these formulations, like famously, against the spirit of the law and to transform like free republic into an authoritarian empire without changing law, like they did in Rome, etc. Now there is the tension between the defense of order, the description of order in law, and the induction of transgression. This is this famous paradox from St. Paul, that law creates desire to violate it. This is built into the concept of law. Law does not exist without violations. And it paradoxically implies them. Out of which there is the second, the consequence of this contradiction is another one, is that when law does actually provide a sanction and bans something, then the ban of a criminal kind, for example, very often it transforms itself into repression, into the ban. Repression in the Freudian sense. Because the very emergence of crime is a scandal for law, and law tends to normalize it if it includes it into the criminal code. So, for example, incest is mostly not in the criminal law, because if we mention it, we already acknowledge it. So that's also an internal contradiction. And then there is a tension, which I will develop more on, between the rational content of law, kind of natural law, something that is logical, and the absolutely crucial moment of the subject, of the subjectivity in law. Law is made by humans, by persons, and empowers persons. That's particularly true for contemporary law, but actually of any law. So this all sounds like trivial, but actually these are very problematic tensions. Now, to generalize these tensions, you can build a more general theory of this contradiction, and I'm going a little Schellingian here in this talk. It's Schellingian dialectics, not a Hegelian dialectics. So there is a tension between the subject and the object in law in general. First, law is a system of habits, and on the other hand, law is a system of commands. These are two perspectives on law that are not easy to reconcile. However, there are two obvious syntheses of the two oppositions. The first is what Fichte called Tathandlung, or we today call performative. There is a sort of action, a ritual action actually, that becomes real as it is pronounced. And this is a command that immediately becomes habit, that immediately becomes an objective fact. And that seems to be like a beneficial, a positive scenario in this contradictory landscape. However, there is the downside of this synthesis. And that's precisely the kind of sliding down the slope of the literality of law. There is an objectivity within the law itself. No matter how subjective you are, how creative you are when writing law, there is a tendency of law petrifying and thus deactivating the performative. So it's also a dialectical synthesis, but that's like a unfortunate synthesis. That's the danger in any law. So you can even build a table of the objective and subjective deviations of legality. So if we go too subjective, we on the one hand have the sovereignty in its despotic forms. We have the paralysis of this sovereignty because, of course, taken on its own, like Walter Benjamin showed, it cannot do anything. It doesn't have any ground for solution. Then we have another subjective deviation, which is what I call law is phantasmagoria. You write very nice constitution, and then it is not being fulfilled. There are legal fictions in any law, but these fictions sometimes tend to take over the actual substance. In the liberal democratic constitution, of course, the whole element dealing with democracy is dangerously tending toward legal fiction. Well, that's what I write what I mean when I write the manufactured consent. But as I already said, there is also the objective deviation, the aforementioned literalization of law, the conservatism of law, which kind of keeps bringing into the old practices, like, I don't know, Second Amendment in the American Constitution, and the rationality itself, in the sense of logical, rationality of understanding, also tends to promote a certain very material, interest-driven understanding of law, the economistic understanding of law in our case. Out of which we can make a conclusion that law is this relationship. Law is the contradiction between the subject and the object. Its efficiency is the play on the letter and spirit, on the rule and its transgression. That's where its force comes from. And this again seems to be a dialectical, a true synthesis, a dialectical solution. But even this, it's not really consoling. Because this kind of synthesis can really become a set of tricks. The law that plays on contradictions may really be demonic. And I use this formula again from Walter Benjamin, whom I already mentioned. And here I give kind of an attempt to reinterpret Hegel's philosophy of right with Benjaminian tools. So look, like Hegel famously structures his philosophy of right, particularly the abstract right, by listing these kind of moments of law. And each of these moments of law has its demonic underside. When you introduce private property, everyone is happy. You actually own your houses and apartments, but in this very moment, law allows for depriving people of their lodgings and making them homeless. It's the primitive accumulation scenario, and we witnessed it in the 90s in Russia. So private property is supposed to be something good, but the actual effect is the contrary. The second in Hegel is the law of contract. But there also, again, the principle of subjectivity and personality is to applaud, but actually it is used to extract manufactured consent from the workers and other employees to sign a contract. The criminal law, third element in Hegel's abstract law chapter, as I already mentioned, the demonic side is the normalization of transgression and the provocation of temptations, I call this. Law seduces into violations. And in like these are two other elements, not necessarily from Hegel already, that obviously the state as a monopoly of violence sounds good, but actually very often serves simply to cover up sadism, torture, and even the human rights, certainly not in Hegel's philosophy of right, but important features of contemporary law, they have a very strong demonic side. First of all, they are, as Lacan said, actually inversions of the 10 Testaments. So they all don't prescribe, but kind of push you to do something bad. And then they function as the imposition of guilt, as all law does, but these kind of rights in particular. I don't have much time. I will not go into this famous discussion between Agamben and Negri very deeply. But what I want to note is that sovereignty itself is very problematic, according to both Agamben and Negri, because it is a legal capture of this kind of constituent power, of this formless and forming element. But Agamben argues against Negri and says that constituent power as such is part of this demonic apparatus. And important for what I will say next, the way Agamben thinks about constituent power is that it has this destituent element. It is not doing. It is the power of not acting. So it's a kind of power minus power, I would say. It's a power that contradicts itself and goes down. This is, again, it's an attempt to overcome, to depart, to abandon this demonic register, but an unsuccessful one, according to Agamben. And here I come to the actual constitutional law, which is the higher law and a law of laws, the norm of norms, as Kelsen called this. It is also historically stemming from the discussions about natural law, which is, by the way, an oxymoron. Law and nature used to be opposites. So there is something not quite legal or super legal in this higher law. Something happens, and this is again a Schellingian moment in my dialectics. Something happens when you square an entity, when you square a law, when you make law refer to law itself. Arguably, this is not quite law any longer. And this is where the constituent power comes, but also other dialectical solutions that particularly emerged in the 19th and 20th centuries. You need something in the law that would go against the law itself. Constituent power is just one of these instruments. Even previously, there was the right of resistance, the Widerstandsrecht, which is kind of also an ultra-legal and extra-legal instance. Then we have the state of emergency in Schmitt, and Schmitt also, of course, is the one who really developed CES's doctrine of constituent power, but interprets it in this extraordinary legal way. But even before Schmitt, in the German legal thought, there was this idea of sovereign restraint and sovereign self-limitation. According to Georg Jelinek, all law actually stems from the initial legal force, the power of sovereign, being limited, imposing limits on itself. So this is also a paradoxical move. And in my view, Schmitt's state of emergency is kind of inversion of Jelinek's self-restraint. But in all of these cases, there is something, again, where law goes against law. And arguably something new emerges. The problem is what is this new? What is this force? The constituent power may be understood naturalistically, like here is this force, it's just the people. But this is too easy. I will show that there is a potential of not simply self-denial in law, but of elevating itself to a higher degree, of squaring it. Look at the ways in which this metanormativity helps overcoming the aforementioned demonic elements. Like there is all these cases, the state of emergency, constituent power, self-limitation. In all of these cases, the subject goes against the norm, can legally break the law, so to say. Constituent power runs into revolutions, destroys the law. In the current climate of demonstration democracy in the West, where revolutions, manifestations are supposed to be tolerated, to be welcomed by the authorities as so many expressions of democracy, there is actually the toleration of violence and even a potential for revolutionary upheaval, for a revolutionary overthrow of authorities. And I would add the actual deliberative model, the self-legislation by popular assemblies that are this new element of constitutions very much discussed, and probably we will see them being introduced into some constitutions. This is again a kind of overcoming of the demonic nature of contract. Here subjects are also empowered, they are signing something, but they are doing this for real and not as a part of legal fiction. So it's instead of signing, electing, and consenting, they're actually discussing. So all of these to say that a good constitution, if it has these extraordinary clauses, which are also dialectical clauses, could actually allow for overcoming and at least moderating the demonic sides of law. But even there, of course, there may be remainders of demonic legality. The aforementioned dialectic of tolerance, well, the aforementioned tolerance can be also seen as provocation. You are tolerant of demonstrations, but then when they happen, you you use your emergency powers, or it may be used by other forces, for example, other countries, to undermine a polity. So tolerance of constituent power is not innocent. The sovereignty as a way to limit and subsume rationality is also insufficient. The more rational the law becomes, in a way, the more mystical and charismatic should be the authority that kind of holds it together. The modern constitutions with their counterbalances, checks and balances, which are also kind of dialectical institutions meant to limit the legality, they can easily lead to the polarization of society and the instigation of civil war. The introduction of parliament, again, based on the constituent power, based on these kind of grassroots checks on the government, lead to a certain petrification of policy. And finally, what I already mentioned, this last item is what Agamben is afraid about. You elevate this negative, destituent, non-acting force, potentiality into law, and eventually the result is the lawless tyrant who establishes a totalitarian state of exception, etc. It's not quite clear in Agamben how this horrible event happens, but he's up to something here. So to conclude, I can show how this worked in the current Russian constitution, which was made in 1993. Now it's been amended in 2020, so it's not the same constitution, but in principle, for the most of the existence of the Russian state, there was this liberal constitution created in 1993. And this constitution is driven by these very benevolent ideas of limiting power and introducing these checks on the demonic legality. They are there because they are there in most constitutions. For example, this is a federal constitution, quite traditionally. So it has the hierarchy of governments and parliaments that kind of are superior to each other. And it has the French system, the semi-presidential regime, where you have both the president and the prime minister, and there is a certain ambiguity of who actually is the head of the country. Here in Germany they also have this, but it's more univocal. Which was supposed to be good in the sense that the prime minister doesn't have all the authority. There is also someone to check the prime minister, but this other figure, the president, doesn't run the government affairs. They were also, sorry, I will take 3 more minutes. There were other demonic elements there. For example, they borrowed from the French constitution the formula, the president can remain in his seat only for 2 terms in a row, 2 consequent terms, which was immediately, I think, like a seduction, a provocation to the classical example of this ambiguity between law and its transgression. This aforementioned duplication into president and prime minister, was this a really a delimitation, or was it an instrument to elevate the figure of the president into the quasi-monarchic power? And that's the latter was the case eventually. The federal element was, for many reasons, it deteriorated into fiction. Because the subjects of federation, the regions that were chosen to be the subjects of federation, were defined in two contradictory ways, as ethnic national republics and as simple districts of the administrative units of the homogeneous Russian territory. This created again the fictionalization of federalism and of the entire constitution. And finally, the right of free assembly that is there, like in any other constitution, was undermined through this global mechanism, where the assembly and demonstration, protest movement quickly develops into a revolutionary force, and there is violence. And this allowed to Russian government, like to many others, to say that this is a danger to security, and they banned these demonstrations and manifestations altogether. So they didn't do it for nothing. There was a real ambiguity in the constitutional law. Russian constitution created this sovereign crown presidency, as some say, through the dialectical instrument of checks and balances and of extraordinary self-limitation of law. So they wanted to do something good, but they did something very bad. That's the counter-finality of dialectics. So this is the last slide. Is there something to be done? I think that all of this leads to the need to rethink the Constitution and to really make Constitution an element of overcoming the demonic ambiguities of law, which can only be done by intensifying and increasing these dialectical elements. And we use, in our project, we use many of those. It's the federation that would be isomorphic, run on each level, starting with the grassroots deliberative assemblies. And this is a way to leave aside the problem of fictionality. There must be a permanent constituent drive if we need the federation to be real, to be going. There must be a proliferation of roles and functions. Many of them check each other, not two, not three, but the checks and balances system should increase and penetrate the body of the society. The use of lottery, which is absent in most contemporary constitutions, is very important here. Well, there is propaganda of civic virtue, which is also, I mean, it's something that must go above the law. Legality, virtue is about legality, but legality elevated into a personal trait. This is not in our constitution, but I introduced it here just on my own, that we should think of the return to the institutionalization of transgression. Like prostitution, unarmed violence in demonstrations, drinking, gaming, etc. I think this is very important for the spirit of law, in the spirit that Michael Matter was talking about. There should be an orgiastic element in the law if it wants to be taken seriously. Yeah, so the principle of this new constitutionalism should be empowerment and infinite production of institutions, proliferation and of institutions, and the empowerment to build them again and again. That's it. Thank you.
Recently, I heard Gregory Yudin talking about constitutionalism and democracy, and he was mentioning Schumpeter's critique of democracy, claiming that actually on the level of legislation, the law makes no difference between democratic and extremely non-democratic countries, autocratic countries. So he was delegating agency to certain kinds of extra legal agencies. So you, on the contrary, say that these extra legal agencies should be included in the law. So how should we deal contemporary uprising? Should we include it in the law as you claim, or as Gregory claims that there is no democratic rule that can truly manifest and reveal a real revolt, a real social revolt?
I have to look what Greg
use the mic.
I have to look what Greg was actually saying. It sounds like a complicated thought. But demonstrations and revolutions as they are now are no longer one-time historical events. They are an institution. So a liberal democratic state like Germany or France, how do we know it is democratic? The elections, they happen in France, they happen in Russia now. You can say that maybe there is a lot of falsification, but arguably, at least some time ago, there was not so much. And nevertheless, we consider France and Germany to be democratic, and Russia and Turkey not so democratic. And Turkey is more problematic. So the criterion is whether they actually shoot people during the protest or they don't. The third.
So the question is about performance.
No, the question is that these movements, they are already included, whether you want this or not. We've lived in this regime for a while, so they've become institutions, they've become rituals, which is okay. But again, we have to take this seriously, and we should be aware that by simply writing down, there is a human right for assembly or something, or human right for speech, that you are creating a revolutionary situation, and that you must have a responsible plan how to address it. That's fine.
Mm-hmm. And so was Maidan within the law? Sorry.
What?
Was Maidan within the law?
Maidan. It was within this larger law of color revolution. That's what I'm saying. It's not law like in the book, on the books. But there is a law that allows such events as Maidan. Peaceful assembly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my name is Carlos Segovia. I work on post-nihilism and metaconceptuality, and I've just moved to Berlin. So my question would like to touch upon the discussion between Agamben and Negri somehow, but most importantly perhaps on something you've mentioned at the very outset of the conference, and something very beautiful which I think that Michael Matter has mentioned during his talk. So while the link between the permanently reconstituent condition of the phyton and the demos, I think it's a really very beautiful and thought-provoking idea, and the link can be made. Isn't it that if we think nonetheless the political action of the demos through a Spinozist lens, natura naturans, potentia absoluta, etc., we may be somehow reducing the very idea of the demos to self-affirmation. This, for me, presents a little problem, and I wonder whether it is not the problem at stake in any dialectical thought, in the sense that it plays constantly with the oscillations between two terms. You've shown this perfectly. So in this sense, self-affirmation from below against any order imposed from above. So if you allow me to, very, very briefly, I would like here to recover a little quotation, a little quote from Baudrillard in De la Séduction, which I think that really captures these, and I would like to bring it into the discussion. It says, "Ce qui s'y oppose à la loi n'est pas la liberté mais la règle." That which opposes law is not freedom but rule. Nous avons confondu l'obligation au sens forte, rituelle, immémorielle, qu'elle a dans les cycles des hommes et des choses, avec la contrainte banalisée des lois qui nous régissent sous les signes inverses de la liberté. Well, I don't risk the translation because it would be endless, right? But I think that it's easily captured, right? Is it about law, freedom? Is there a third term that we may introduce in this?
Yeah, well, I agree with you, and that's what I was trying to say. There is a law against law. There is something in the regularity of law that makes it banal, the kind of sediments this. Therefore, there is law and law. There are two levels of law. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. My name is Deniz. Thank you for these fantastic presentations. I have two very brief questions. One, can you please elaborate the relationship between human rights and Lacanian understanding immersion of 10 Testaments a bit more? And my second question is how this metanormativity could be related to natural law, because natural law can be interpreted in several different ways, like God's rules or justice as a starting point, how we can think about metanormativity with these criterion or grounds. Thank you.
Artemy, Mike.
Yeah, I wanted just to say that metanormativity, by definition, is no longer normativity. There is this kind of new quality to it. I would say that the power of the Constitution, the power of the higher law, is law being squared. It's the law, again, I already said this, it's the law of laws. And if Agamben thinks of constituent power as being something negative, as a subtraction, so to say, of power from itself, then in the constitutionalism and in what I'm saying, there is on the contrary, the kind of multiplication of power by itself, which leads you, which gives you an alternative understanding of power, of political power. But constituent power is not only underneath, but it's also on the top. One cannot say that power comes only from the people, from below.
I have just a quick question. How would you assess the recent attempt to write a new constitution in Chile?
Positively. We had a discussion with Camila Vergara here in Berlin in June, where we discussed it in detail. Basically, our approach is through institutions, and their approach is through rights. It's the rights-based constitution, which, this can be discussed for a long time. But I think that one of them is better and another is worse.
Okay, just two last short questions. Oksana and Sasha.
You referred to Benjamin's critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, and I wanted to refer to another Hegel's fragment in the phenomenology of spirit, the dialectics of the human and the divine law, where there is a human law, the established written law of the state or of the polis, the law of Creon, and the divine, the Antigone, the law that is followed by Antigone, who deliberately transgresses the human law. And I thought maybe, what would you think about the possibilities of subscribing within our future constitution the divine law, or what you think of its possibilities?
Yeah, but Constitution originally was the divine law. There is this important article by Corbyn, the higher law origin of American Constitution. It's literal, I mean, and there are references to Antigone all in the American jurisprudence all through. It's there.
Thank you for this. The puzzle is in the idea of the self-restraint of the sovereign, which you mentioned, and so the historical, of course, that came from the what restrains him, what motivates him to self-restrain. So historical, of course, that was the idea that the sovereign is God-given, so he is accountable before God. But so nowadays he is accountable before the people, and we come to the usual paradoxes. And I always suspect that there is sort of poaching, like contrabanda of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism, yeah. Jeremy Bentham's idea of the common good, the maximization of the common good. So the sovereign self-restrains because for the sake of the common good. What do you think about that?
Yes, salus populi, of course, is the reason for any prerogative of the sovereign. But the sovereign would have the prerogative in any case. And unfortunately, when we say that our prime ministers and presidents are not really sovereign, this is a legal fiction. Like they inherit the sovereignty that had been there in the previous constitutions. As you say, and to think that they don't really have sovereignty is an illusion. And therefore, on my slide, there is this virtue part. Maybe I didn't explain why it had to do with this metanormativity, but that's why. Because virtue is self-restraint. And the whole Constitution and constitutionalism, I think, doesn't work without something as Republican virtue. It will just never happen. So which means that this spirit, this dialectical spirit of legality, should also penetrate like the individual. So the individual should also be meta-normative or meta-individual. Because you are right, I mean, without virtue, there is no reason to think that the actual president or prime minister would self-limit. And we saw that if a completely legal
Artem.
head of government, you appoint Putin a prime minister and then a president. It's totally legal, and he's saying, I am going to be a legal prime minister, and that's why he has his authority initially. And then if he doesn't have any virtue, it's quite easy to convert this into the actual physical sovereignty. That's again the demonic transgression. The sovereignty, the true sovereignty, is the unconscious of the liberal constitution, and it's very easily, it's very easy to burst it through. So virtue becomes crucial. Bildung, institutions of political education, etc. But it's not trivial. It's not like to be nice to like your mother and father, not to beat anyone up, but something more complex, something very fundamental. The capacity to overcome yourself, the capacity of being a master to yourself. Very important thing, very hard to learn.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for both presenters and for the audience.